All right, welcome everybody. This is a lecture on chapter 3, the Age of Exploration. My suggestion for kind of how you should watch this, read chapter 3 first. Read through chapter 3, take your notes. And then once you're done reading through chapter 3, I would recommend watching this lecture video. It'll be kind of a good overview and review. While you're watching this video, I'll kind of pause every once in a while, take some notes on a separate Word document. I'm not going to wait too long at the Word document, so my suggestion is when I get there, pause the video, and then you can either add the notes to your own Google Doc, wherever you have your notes, or if you're taking your notes handwritten, you can just take a minute and kind of add those annotations to your own notes. So again, this is chapter 3, the Age of Exploration. I'm going to try to keep this to 20 minutes, but we'll see how long I talk for. All right, first up, when we're talking about the Age of Exploration, we have to talk about the motivations. Why did the Europeans want to sail from the old world, Europe, to the new world, the Americas? Some historians somewhere along the way came up with a really easy mnemonic device, or way to remember it. It's the 3 Gs: God, glory, and gold. God tells us that a lot of Europeans wanted to spread the word of God, to spread Christianity or to spread Catholicism. When we get to chapter 2, we'll learn about the Jesuits, who were some Catholic missionaries who would go to the New World to spread the Catholic faith. So that's God. Glory is all about trying to gain more power. The more colonies you had, the more power a country had. And so England would be competing against Spain, competing against France, competing against the Netherlands to try to see who could get the most colonies, kind of as a way to like flex their muscles almost. And then gold literally means gold. Gold in North America, silver in South America, but then also spices, trying to find a trade route to India, things like that. So again, we've got our 3 different motives. As we work through the Age of Exploration, we'll try to explore what we think was maybe the main motivation. In my opinion, I think it was mostly about gold or wealth, and then also a little bit about glory, trying to make their country as strong as possible. I think God was just the excuse. It was the justification to convince others that what they were doing was okay. But there's evidence out there that you could argue for any of them. Those are the motivations. And then for the methods, or the reason why the Europeans were able to both travel to the Americas and easily conquer them, was because of some key new inventions. The caravel was this ship. The caravel was a long but skinny ship that was very sturdy and stable, but could travel quicker and longer distances. So they're able to do the transatlantic journey. The compass and the astrolabe would both tell sailors where they are. Compass tells you where you're going. The astrolabe tells you by looking at the stars where you are, like longitude, latitude, so you know where you are on the map. And then gunpowder, which the Europeans got through trade from China. Gunpowder would be used in cannons, muskets, rifles to easily take care of the native population. So I am going to drag this over here. Let's see. I'm going to add a little bit of notes here. And I'm going to say the motivations is God, glory, and then gold. And then kind of like for a method, they had new inventions. So they had the caravel, they had the astrolabe, they had gunpowder. And then I'm going to kind of bold glory and gold, because I think those are the 2 main motivations. All right, back over to here. These are some pictures of what these would actually look like. And so these were old-fashioned telescopes, technically, I guess. This is what an astrolabe would look like. It's, again, by looking at the stars and where the constellations are, you could have kind of a sense of where you are in the world so that you sail to the right place. That was an old-fashioned globe. Looks a little bit different from what we have now. Portugal and Spain, those were the first 2 European countries to explore the New World. Portugal started it off mostly in the early 1500s. They were going mostly to Africa and India. We'll see a map in a second, I think. They're going to sail around the southern coast of Africa trying to get to India. And so some names you might see in the textbook or other places, Prince Henry the Navigator or Bartholomew Diaz, they're going along the African coast, and they're going to India to get spices, gold, and just trade in general. And so very quickly, because Portugal is the first European country, to travel this trade route, they're able to build fortresses. They're able to kind of put their flag in these regions and claim it as their own. Now, obviously, they're taking it from the Africans and the Indians, but that kind of scared off Europeans, other Europeans, because Portugal basically said, hey, this is ours. We found it first. And so it kind of became their turf, if you will. And so Spain figured, okay, well, if Portugal is going to Africa and India, we've got to go somewhere else. And so Spain goes across the Atlantic to the Americas, and they kind of claim that as their realm, I suppose. When England and France get into the exploration game 100 years later, they're trying to catch up. And so France goes mostly to Canada, England goes to the Atlantic coast, trying to catch up and get colonies where they were able to. And so this gives us a good map of where Portugal is going. So Portugal, I don't know if you can see my mouse, hopefully you can. Portugal is right over here in like the bottom left corner of Europe. They're going along the African coast, building fortresses just along the coast. They're not really going into the heart of Africa. And then over to India, where they have this trade route now to all throughout Africa, which they're going to use for slave trade, among other things, and then to India for that spice trade. So this becomes the Portuguese territory, if you will. And then Spain is going to modern day Central America, South America, so Latin America. So you can see there are all sorts of Spanish journeys to Florida, to the Caribbean, to Mexico, Central America, and along the South American coast. And then finally, the English are going to the Atlantic coast. So this would be like New York, New England. This is the South, like the Carolinas. And so England is going more to North America. So every European country kind of claims a piece of the Americas as their own, obviously with really horrible effects for the native populations, which we'll see shortly. The Spanish kind of become the most famous explorers, at least early on. And they were known as conquistadores, or conquerors, I suppose. Hernán Cortés conquers the Aztec Empire in Mexico. Francisco Pizarro conquers the Incan Empire in Peru. These were massive, sophisticated empires of hundreds of thousands of people that had their own religion, had their own economy, had their own governmental structure. And Cortés and Pizarro, these Spanish explorers, because of technology, because of manipulation, and also because of the diseases that they brought with them, are able to relatively quickly, I suppose, conquer and control the native populations. Some of the ways that they were able to do that was through a system that they called the Encomienda system. I had a typo there, sorry, I'll type it out on the notes. The Encomienda system was basically a system of forced labor, where the native indigenous people of South America, Latin America, Mexico, would be forced to work for the Spaniards. And if they didn't work, they'd be whipped, they'd be beaten, they'd be arrested, they'd be mutilated. And so it was basically a system of slavery, of forced labor. And the Spaniards used that as a way to control, to manipulate, to exploit or take advantage of the natives. Not only that, but the Spaniards came with diseases, especially smallpox, that the indigenous peoples were not immune to. And historians estimate that killed between 30 to 40% of the native population. Now, whether that was intentional or not, historians still kind of disagree on whether the Spaniards knew what they were doing, if they knew they were bringing diseases. But the effect is the same. 30 to 40% of the native people were killed. Now, eventually the Spaniards will get rid of the Encomienda system. Next week, we will probably read, either next Wednesday or the Monday following, we'll read some excerpts from Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a Spanish priest who criticized the abuse of the natives, and eventually he convinced the Spaniards to get rid of that system. But for quite a while, the Spaniards were basically enslaving and exploiting the natives. All right, these are some pictures of some of the travels that I've been to over the years of some of these different empires. This is Tenochtitlan. I think it's either Tenochtitlan or Teotihuacan. I get those two mixed up. This was like the Aztec capital in outside of Mexico City. This is Tikal, which was a Mayan capital. This is in Guatemala. This is Machu Picchu. This is Cusco, which were the capitals of the Incan Empire. Again, these massive American empires that were conquered by the Spaniards when the Spaniards arrived. Okay, so I'm going to add some notes over here about the Spanish. Spanish exploration. So they go to Latin America, South America, Central America, and they conquer the natives through a few different systems. First, they introduce smallpox, which kills 30 to 40% of the people. And then they also have the Encomienda system, which was forced labor, basically enslaving the natives. The Spaniards also set up this whole racial caste system, which was basically like a racial hierarchy. So the Spaniards were at the top, African slaves were at the bottom, and then depending on how much, your Spaniards at the top, African slaves were at the bottom, the indigenous peoples were just above that, and then people of mixed blood, depending on how much blood you had, would be in the middle. I think we still see that today in a lot of Latin American countries. The lighter your skin, oftentimes the better you're treated, whereas the darker your skin in Latin American countries, or really in the US, might face more discrimination. And a lot of that is because of this, I should actually add this, is because of this racial caste system, or like a racial hierarchy that the Spaniards set up. White Spaniards on top, African slaves at the bottom, and then people of mixed blood in the middle. Okay. So that was Spain, and you can see from this map, Spain conquered a huge chunk of the Americas. They got there quote unquote first. I mean, the natives had been there for tens of thousands of years, and there had been some other journeys from the Vikings and other cultures. But the Spaniards were the first Europeans who were able to really conquer the Americas and make it their own. And so everybody else is catching up. England, they're the red, they're labeled as Britain here. They go mostly along the Atlantic coast, and they create permanent colonies, 13 colonies you studied in 8th grade. France goes mostly for trade, timber and fur over here. And then the Dutch, or the Netherlands, they're actually over in India and Southeast Asia through a company called the Dutch East India Company that we'll explore in a later chapter. So Spain kind of is, because they get to the Americas 100 years before the other European countries, they get this huge chunk of land. They exploit the natives for gold and silver. The other European countries have to catch up. The biggest, well, one of the biggest effects of the Age of Exploration, in addition to native people losing their land and livelihood, was the African slave trade. And so we saw earlier that map of the, let me actually just go back to it. We saw that map earlier of the Portuguese sailing along the African coast. And as they went, they would set up fortresses, forts, trading posts, things like that along the coast. They would make deals with different African chiefs, or just go straight to different African tribes, conquer them, and enslave the people. And so what we see is something called the triangular trade. Yeah, I'm going to show this map and then I'll go back. The triangular trade was a movement of people, goods, and resources between 3 parts of the world: Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Slaves were brought from Africa to the Americas against their will, forced labor. In the Americas, they would work in plantations to grow crops like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. Those crops would then be sailed across the Atlantic to Europe. Europe would then take that sugar, turn it into rum, or they would take that cotton, turn it into textiles, clothing, rugs, things like that, send it back down to Africa, and that's what they would buy the slaves with. They would buy the slaves with rum, with textiles, with rugs, with tobacco and things like that. And so the triangular trade is, again, the flow of goods, people, resources, crops between Africa, the Americas, and Europe. But what you might notice is that every single path that we have, every single flow of goods and people, the Europeans are the only ones benefiting every time. When the natural resources go from the Americas to Europe, that's benefiting Europe because they're getting all of these natural resources they can make a lot of money off of, and the Americas don't really get much. The indigenous people don't get anything at all. When these manufactured goods like textiles, rum, and other things are sent to Africa, the Africans don't really benefit because they're, in exchange for these things, are enslaving their own people. And then when the slaves are brought from Africa to the Americas, that doesn't benefit the Africans, obviously. It doesn't benefit the Americans because the native peoples are getting forced off of their land. Who does it benefit? It benefits the Europeans because they're using this slave labor to get resources, to make goods, to make money. And so when we're talking about the effects of the Age of Exploration, one of the biggest effects is the triangular trade. With the triangular trade, what we're seeing is crops and resources from the Americas to Europe. We're seeing African slaves from Africa, to the Americas. I'm going out of order here, my bad. And then we're seeing manufactured goods from Europe to the Americas. But the key thing here is only Europe benefits from this trade. And so this triangular trade is a system designed to enrich the Europeans at the expense of African slaves, at the expense of the Americas, the native people who are losing their land and are being exploited. In addition to this, the Middle Passage, which was the journey from Africa to the Americas, was incredibly dangerous. Oftentimes more than half of the people transported from Africa to the Americas would die along that journey. And the Europeans, we're going to explore this a lot more next week, the Europeans would view the Africans literally as chattel, as cattle or livestock. When you look at the ship manifests or the list of all the things that the ships would transport, livestock like cattle and slaves would be in the same section. So the Europeans literally did not view the Africans as human, and we're going to explore that a lot more next week. Okay, so we have this again, this triangular trade that enriches the Europeans. The other huge effect of the Age of Exploration that we see both in the Americas and in Europe is what's called the Columbian Exchange. I'm just going to throw all these slides up. The Columbian Exchange is named after Christopher Columbus, who was the first European, at least in recorded history, to reach the Americas. And the Columbian Exchange is the exchange of goods, ideas, and diseases between the New World, the Americas, and the Old World, Europe. And so what we have is, to the Old World, to Europe, we have a lot of foods, things like potatoes. The Irish are famous for potatoes. They didn't actually have potatoes until the 15 or 1600s. Corn, or maize, corn was created by the Incas. Tomatoes as well, created by South American tribes, or South American native peoples rather. Also raw products like sugar, cotton, and tobacco from all of these massive plantations that were worked by forced labor. That's the things going to Europe. And so Europe benefits by this quite a bit because they're getting all of these nutritious foods. Potatoes are incredibly cheap. They're easy to grow. They grow under the ground, and so they can survive a cold winter, and they're super nutritious. And so potatoes revolutionize diets. People are eating better in Europe. There's population growth. People are healthier because of the foods that Europeans are getting from the New World. They're also getting luxury goods, gold, silver, diamonds, things like that. which sounds really nice. The Spaniards have a short golden age in the 1500s where they get really, really rich from all of the gold and silver they're getting from the Americas. But it actually backfires and actually leads to inflation. Inflation basically means when prices go up. And so because there was so much gold and silver going to Spain, prices went up. Eventually, once they couldn't find any more gold and any more silver, but the price was still super high, the Spanish economy collapses and Spain basically falls apart. So all of this influx of gold and silver to Europe sounds really nice, but it didn't really last. So I'm going to start to put some details for the Columbian Exchange. I know I didn't go to the American side yet, but that's the other big effect. So this is the exchange of goods, ideas, diseases between old and new worlds. Whoops. So to Europe, what are they getting? They're getting food and crops, like potato, like corn, like tobacco, and that's going to lead to longer lifespans, better diets, but it'll also lead to inflation because of all the silver coming in. The Americas, what are people in the Americas getting? They're getting a lot of plants as well, wheat, grapes, and olives. They're getting animals, livestock, horses, cows, and pigs, but they're also getting diseases like smallpox especially. And so I think the two biggest things that I would say that are going to the Americas, you have livestock and you have smallpox. Livestock is important because it completely changes the way that the indigenous native people live their lives. They now all of a sudden are rather than just being farmers, maybe they're looking over cattle, horses, pigs, and things like that, which is going to have some pretty big effects on the ecology or agriculture of these regions. And then the smallpox is going to wipe out their entire 50% of population. So this this graph rather does a good job of showing some of the goods going in both directions. If you want to pause here and write some of those down, you're welcome to. And then the last thing I want to talk about, whoops, my bad, is there's also a shift in power. When we looked at the Renaissance in chapter 1, the center of power in Europe was in the Mediterranean, specifically Italy. And because Italy was able to trade within the Mediterranean to Spain, to Africa, to the Ottomans in the Middle East, they were able to control trade. What we see now, though, is all of the new powerful countries, they're on the Atlantic coast. Spain, Portugal, England, and France, they're all on the Atlantic coast. They can easily get to the Americas, whereas Italy can't. So there's a shift in power. There's a change in who has the power in Europe. Now, tiny little Italian city-states like Florence or Rome or Venice, they can't keep up because these explorations are super expensive. Who are the countries that are able to gain power? It's the big ones, it's the wealthy ones, Spain, Portugal, England, and France. Again, if you go back to a map, I hope I have a map here that shows it. No, I don't. This is awkward. Whatever. Portugal, Spain, England, and France, they're all along the Atlantic coast. They can easily get over to the Americas. So let me add just a couple more quick notes, and then we will wrap up. So again, last effect of the exploration, there's a shift in power, and Atlantic states gain more power. So this is England, France, Spain, and Portugal. And they have huge countries, huge tax revenue to kind of fund these journeys. So with that, I'm going to go back to kind of our main slide of notes here. If you want to pause your screen now to get all those notes down, you can. And again, we'll talk about this a lot more next week and the week after.